How can you prevent this from happening to you? I've been riding scooters every day since I got my first one in 2017. And since that time, I've ridden over thousands of miles on 70 different models, and I've fallen more times than I can count. These are the things that I wish I knew when I started riding. So typically I see 3 riding stances. The first one is right foot forward, which is considered goofy, left foot forward, which is considered regular, and side by side, which is considered dangerous. I don't recommend ever riding side by side with your feet like this, because when you brake or accelerate hard, you don't have any stability on the scooter, and it could lead to you going over the handlebars. We'll get to that later. Now, which foot forward you use is not dependent on whether you're regular or goofy foot when you're skateboarding, but rather which side of the street cars are parked on. The biggest risk you have is that the car doors open as you're actually riding past them. This has happened to me countless times. When you're riding and you have your right foot forward, because that's the side of the cars are on, right? Now, when the car door opens, as you can see here, the car door is open, and you want to get out of the way, of course, you're going to start to, turn away from the car door. And when that happens, then your shoulder and the side of you are the things that are most exposed, okay? Now, imagine that now you're riding with your left foot forward, so you're kind of turned this way. If you're going to try to get out of the way, right, you're going to be leaning like this, and look at what is exposed to the car door. All your vital organs, everything that you basically don't want to have hit is going to be exposed as you're trying to get out of the way. So that is why I recommend riding with your right foot forward, because you can kind of like tuck into a crouch position, meaning that you can throw your shoulder into that car door if you have to hit it, rather than your chest. That's not going to be very fun, whereas this, you might still be able to walk away from that type of accident. Probably the easiest thing that you should know to do while you're riding is just not lock out your knees. So what you want to do is just have a slight bend in them. It's also safer so you don't risk injury to your own legs when you hit an unforeseen bump. But then also, if you're riding with your legs locked out on really bumpy terrain, you can actually have that kind of vibrating brain massage, and that leads to blurred vision also. The next thing we're going to cover is proper braking, and braking is something that I see people doing wrong all the time. And when you're on a powerful scooter, especially one with 2 brakes, one on each wheel, it's actually pretty easy to go over the handlebars if you don't know what you're doing and you're braking really hard. So there's 2 techniques to braking. The first one is being in the right position when you hit those brakes hard. So you're riding like this, okay? And you hit the brakes. As you're hitting them, or right before, you want to go back and down. I know this looks weird while I'm like, stationary, but when you're actually braking, your momentum is going this way. So really what you're doing is you're counteracting the forces that are pushing you forward, and you're trying to stay back. And the reason that you're doing that is because you're trying to actually keep that back tire on the ground, okay? When you brake hard, if you're not putting your weight back and down, the forces are gonna throw you over the handlebars. That's something that you don't want to have happen. The other half of braking properly, especially if you're trying to get the least amount of braking distance as possible when you are in an emergency situation, when you squeeze the brakes, you want to get as close as possible to locking out the tires without actually locking them out. That is going to get you the minimum braking distance, which is the best when you're in an emergency situation. One of the tests that we do here at ESG is the braking test, where we go from a little over 15 miles an hour down to 0 in as little distance as possible, and we measure that in feet using RaceLogic racing equipment. So you've got it when you put very little pressure on the stem while braking, your wheels are close but not fully locking out, and your rear wheel doesn't lift off the ground. So let's turn it over to Paul over at ESG Labs, where he's going to tell you how much traction you get in each type of condition.
No matter how good of a rider you are, you're still at the mercy of your terrain. If you think wet conditions are slippery, you'll be surprised at how slippery these other conditions can be. If we take dry pavement as the baseline, 100% traction, wet pavement will give you about 85–90% traction. As we go down the list, it gets worse and worse. Dry metal will give you about 63% traction, whereas sand is 55%, wet metal 48%, dry leaves 35%, and wet leaves, the worst of all, 28% traction. That's 1/3 of the traction that you'd have riding on wet pavement. The bottom line is, if you're on sand, wet metal, dry leaves, or wet leaves, don't turn and don't brake. Try to avoid them, but if you can't, wait till you get to the other side before you slow down or turn. All right, I'm gonna throw it back to you, Chuck.
So there's a common misconception that electric scooters are for off-roading. And while some electric scooters can handle off-road terrain, the real issue is with the jumps. What's okay is when you're on the roads and you're taking speed bumps at speed or hopping off the occasional curb. That is a little bit of pressure. The key here is to avoid any jumps of 1 foot or more. This will cause too much pressure on parts of the scooter that are not built to handle that much force, and you'll end up with, at best, a broken scooter, and at worst, an injury to yourself. Now, what is okay, right, is when you have terrain like this, where, you know, the ground is sandy, but it's pretty solid. You need to be careful, but it's not a ton of jumps. Most scooters, you can actually, you know, traverse this terrain without too much problem. It goes without saying that you need to wear a helmet, but what a lot of people don't know is that different types of helmets are meant for different speed of crashes. A bicycle helmet is only rated for crashes up to 20 miles per hour. The next level up is a BMX style helmet, but those are also only rated for crashes up to 20 miles per hour. Now, if you're gonna go over 20 miles per hour, or if you're prone to falling, then you're gonna opt for a motorcycle style helmet. This is an open face variety. And the fourth type of helmet, the one that we always recommend and the ones that we wear ourselves, are the motorcycle style helmet with full face protection, as you can see here. So when you fall, and you will, when you hit the front of your face, you will still have a face. The next thing you're going to want to really pay attention to is the cruise control. So for the first couple weeks of owning an electric scooter, I highly recommend not having that function turned on, if possible, on your scooter. A lot of times there's no audible or visual indicator that it has activated. So you might be going up a hill and you're pulling hard on the throttle, 100%, right? So you're rolling up to that stop sign, you got the trigger all the way pulled down, you let go of it, right? Thinking that your scooter is going to slow down naturally and come to a stop, but what actually happens is, because the cruise control is activated, it's thinking you want 100% throttle. So you're letting off, the scooter is now cresting the hill, so it's now shooting forward and you're super caught off guard. That's happened to me a bunch of times, and it's not something that I recommend anybody doing. One thing that we all need to remember is to keep both hands on the handlebars at all times. On bicycles, you see people all the time riding without hands. You cannot do that on electric scooters. With bicycles, that front wheel tends to stay very stable and straight. Scooter wheels are smaller and they tend to wobble, right? And so you don't want to get the wobbles. That's how people fall. If you need to wave at somebody, give them the winky face, or, you know, shrug a shoulder at them, something like that. And if you think you need to make a turn and you want to signal, what I recommend is signal with your foot. So if you're turning right, put a right foot out, okay? If you're turning left, put a left foot out. And just, you know, do it safely, but that's a lot safer than taking a hand off the handlebar and getting the wobbles and falling. I hope this video has helped you learn from my mistakes. If you found it useful, please give it a thumbs up and send it to all your scooter riding friends that might find it useful. Have you fallen? Tell us your story in the comments. We want to hear what happened to you, and maybe that'll help other people avoid the same fate.